Hello, and thank you for joining us for today's webinar. What are the new hours of service rule changes? We originally planned this webinar a month or so ago, but of course the government took its time to announce the proposed changes as anticipated. But finally, the US DOT, the Department of Transportation, on Wednesday officially announced the proposed changes to the federal hours of service regulations. And this is a year after the initial advance notice of proposed rulemaking. In this webinar, we will dive into the 5 proposed hours of service changes, what the industry thinks, what the changes mean for drivers, motor carriers, ELD providers, and potentially when to expect these changes to happen. Dave Gray, the president of Glostone Trucking Solutions, will be our speaker today. Dave has owned and operated Glostone Trucking Solutions since 2001, serving the trucking industry nationwide from our Portland, Oregon office with full regulatory trucking compliance services, which includes everything from tax reporting, asset management, driver training, ELDs, DOT safety, audit compliance, and more. And Dave serves as the current president of the North American Transportation Services Association. He's an active industry advisory committee board member for both the International Fuel Tax Agreement, IFTA, and International Registration Plan, IRP. He's also active with the Oregon Motor Carrier Transportation Advisory Committee, and actually he's going to be hosting next week the ODOT Motor Carrier open house here at our Glostone offices in the Portland, Oregon area. And we also organize a free annual safety and compliance conference in January for local and online industry leaders. Before we begin, a couple housekeeping items for the webinar. This webinar is scheduled for an hour, but it'll likely not take the whole time. Phones will be muted during the webinar, so please, if you have any questions, write them down in the chat box. I, Luke Kibbe, am your moderator today. I'll keep an eye on all of the questions. We'll have a question and answer session at the end to answer any of those questions. And no matter what, this webinar is being recorded, and as always, we will send the presentation and the link of the recording of this webinar probably on Monday, if I can't get it out by the end of the day today. So keep an eye out in your email boxes either this afternoon or on Monday. This webinar is sponsored by PermitBook driver app and fleet management tool. It's turning your permit book or your truck book from paper into an electronic format that can be accessed anywhere on the road or if the driver's away from their cab. The app is an easy reference of documents stored under category headings such as company documents, driver documents, truck and trailer documents. You can go check it out at permitbook.com. And if you're planning on attending to the Great American Trucking Show this year, PermitBook will also be in Dallas, Texas for GATS. With that, we will just dive on in. Dave, you can take it away.
All right, Luke, thank you. As you mentioned, this is probably the third time we've had to postpone this webinar because the FMCSA kept announcing deadlines on when they'd have this information out to everybody and then kept missing those deadlines. And again, this is new information. They just published this information like 2 days ago. So this is hot off the press, if you will. And again, this is a proposed rulemaking at this point. And we'll kind of go into, what that means and how do you get it from proposed to a finalized rule? What's the thoughts behind that? So we'll talk about that. So I thought just kind of go back into time a little bit and talk about kind of how we got to this point. And again, I think probably many of you know that the hours of service regulations have really been around since the 1930s. So hours of service rules are not new. They've changed over the years, but the hours being regulated is certainly something not new. And of course, with the paper log process, left. I mean, drivers would keep track of their time in 15-minute increments, and there was a lot of, I guess, hours creep that you could bury within those 15-minute increments, and because it was paper, not very precise. So, and so the rules and the regulations, were kind of made to fit a carrier's operations by being able to work in between the lines of those paper logs. So that had gone on for years and years and years. And then the big change along came the ELD, which came mandatory for many operators in December of 17. So with the ELD, away goes the flexibility to hide different things within the 15-minute increments of a paper log grid. ELDs are much more precise, up to the 30 seconds, 30 seconds within the nearest, rule change. So a lot of the things that were kind of hidden away in creative log keeping could no longer be hidden, and they became to the forefront. And of course, lots of feedback when that started to happen, because carriers, they want to follow the rules. They don't want to be out of compliance. So industry started to demand that, this ELD thing, is not flexible enough. There's the drivers are having to run against a clock, and if the clock is ticking down, they tend to go faster in order to make the clock. So industry demanded more flexibility, and the FMCSA and Congress weren't going to back off the ELD. So there were some demands obviously coming from industry. And at the same time happening, obviously there was an administrative change, and kind of a new FMCSA director was put in place. A new director of the Department of Transportation was put in place, and with a commitment to better communicate, to better work with industry and alongside of industry to regulate and have a safe industry versus top down, we're going to tell you what to do and you do it. So we had this ELD, we had new administration, new management within the FMCSA, all happening at once. And so they had then come along and said, okay, this seems to be a problem. We're going to look into this. And I think before yesterday or Wednesday's proposed rulemaking, there really has not been a serious review of hours of service in the last 15 years. So this is definitely big news for the industry. So that's a little background. So what's happening now? And they published and there's different rulemaking. This is a notice to publish a rulemaking, was published back in August of 2018. Again, based on feedback from all the ELD concerns and lack of feedback, the FMCSA and their way they do things, they had listening sessions, they went to the trucking shows, they had seminars, they opened up the public register for comments, and they had many comments, and they completed those listening sessions in October of 2018. And of course, along with that completion was a promise for an expedited final rule. And so that has been since October, almost a year ago. And so Wednesday, the proposed rule finally was published, and that was probably after 3 different delays of when they said we would see these new rules. So it's taken a while, but that's not unusual for the FMCSA. And again, I want to say this is proposed rule at this point. It will go through some more public comment period, and before it becomes final. But this information is the first time we've seen really what they intend to do depending on the feedback they get for over the next time. This I think it's like a 45-day time period, but we'll talk about that in a minute. All right, so what are the changes they are proposing? As Luke mentioned, there are 5 of them. And depending on what segment of the industry you are in, some of them may mean something to you, some of them may not mean anything to you. So the first one we'll talk about is the short haul hours of service exemption. So if you are in the short haul, if you qualify for this exemption, meaning that you have trucks over 26,000 pounds, you can currently, with the exemption, if you go out less than 100 air mile radius and you're back the same day in a 12-hour period, you can use this exemption, and you start and stop at the same location each and every day. If you had smaller trucks at the 26,000 or less pounds, you could go out to 150 air miles and be back within 14 hours and be able to use this exemption. And the exemption meaning you do not have to fill out the graph grid logs. You could just simply keep a time card, and you don't need ELD. So what they did is they synced the 2 different exemptions together and now just are proposing to have one, and that one is the 150 air mile radius and back within 14 hours. So it extends, for the larger trucks, extends the radius out to 150 miles, and it extends the workday back to 2 14-hour days. So it matches what the smaller 26,000 pound regulation was. So that's, for those that use that exemption, that is a pretty big deal. It adds much more flexibility, especially in this industries like construction, where they're out with their trucks early in the morning, and during the summer they're working long days, and then coming back in the evening to the yard, and now they've got a 14-hour window to do that instead of a 12-hour window. Container hauling is another one. I've heard from container haulers that this would allow them to make a little bit longer hauls with the containers, and really adds flexibility for them. And I'm sure there's many other industries that will take advantage to this. It does not extend the driving time whatsoever, so there's still only 11 hours of driving, but it does extend the window in which you can drive up to 14 hours. So the other pro advantage to this, obviously, it simplifies the rules. So if you're running a fleet that has both heavy and the lighter medium duty trucks, that you've got one set of rules to follow instead of, well, this one can go 150 miles, this one can only go 100 miles. So it does simplify the rules and makes it easier to track. The con to this rule, and I think the con to just about every rule that at least I'm reading about within the trade magazines, is, will this make the roads less safe? And there are those that saying this will make the roads less safe, and there are those that say this gives us the flexibility we need, or at least more of the flexibility that we need. So that's change number 1. Change number 2, adverse driving conditions. So currently, if a driver experiences adverse driving conditions, the window of driving can be extended by 2 hours. What this proposal would do is it also extend the 14-hour workday and the 60 or 70-hour rule by 2 hours as well. So in the current rule, you could extend your driving by 2 hours, but if that 2 hours took you over the 14-hour work window, you could get a violation for the 14-hour. Or if that extra 2 hours in adverse conditions of driving took you past your 60 or 70-hour window, you could get a violation for that. So what this change does is clears up, in my mind, the ambiguity in the rules. So it still allows the 2 hours of driving within an adverse driving conditions, but it also extends the 14 and the 60, 70-hour rule by that same 2 hours. So really, to me, it clears up the rules, and you can't get, I've got to take these 2 hours because I'm in a snowstorm, but here I am going to get penalized on my 14-hour day, although I was allowed to do it for driving. So this clears that up. I really, to me, this is just a language thing, and I really don't see any con to this because the 2 hours of driving are going to be taken. It just clears up and cleans up some of the kind of the violations that you could be subject to when having to take this 2 hours of driving. So that's rule or change number 2. Number 3, this rest break. This during the listening session and comments in the past probably is the one rule that received the most comments, most feedback. And the current rule says once you come on duty and start recording on duty time, you have to have a 30-minute break off duty within an 8-hour time period before driving. So on duty plus on duty driving can't go more than 8 hours without having taking 30 minutes off duty. So that's the current rule. So what the proposed rule is they've changed it. They didn't do away with it, but they've changed it so that if you are driving, it's only within the driving status. 8 consecutive hours of driving, you need to have a 30-minute break. And the other thing about this break, it can be taken as on duty, not driving time. So for example, if you're on a long haul and you're approaching maybe 6 hours of driving, you need fuel. You can stop at the fueling station. You go on duty, and maybe the fueling takes you 30 minutes. Maybe you grab a sandwich, whatever, do an inspection or whatever. It takes you 30 minutes on duty while you're fueling. That will accomplish that 30-minute break. You can get back in the truck and continue on driving up to your 11 hours. So it gives more flexibility in when to take your break. And there are some operations that may never have to have a break because they don't never drive 8 consecutive hours. They may have several hours on duty getting the truck loaded, and then they've got 2 hours to this location, and then they're spending an hour or half an hour unloading, and then they get back in the truck and they drive to the next one. That on and off driving type of scenario, you wouldn't ever even have to take a break because you are getting that 30 minutes from behind the wheel by in on-duty situations. So the listening sessions that they did said that this 30-minute break was just absolutely ridiculous, and that drivers were getting breaks, when they fuel up. They're not driving. Their mind is, you're able to rest your mind and body when you're doing on-duty things, but not driving. So that's it didn't go away like many hoped. However, that has added a lot of flexibility in how to take that 30-minute break. So the pros, obviously, again, it provides more flexibility. It really does focus on the long haul driving where it's hour after hour after hour after hour of just driving. So it's really on focuses more on the long haul zombie type driving. You need a break, but within the 8 hours of just continuous driving. And then of course the con, again, is this less safe than the break as it's being mandated today. So that becomes the con. So 30-minute rest break. All right, number 4, and again, this probably is more for the long haul folks. This is the sleeper berth change. Currently, drivers, again, it applies mostly to the long haul type of operations. They can split their 10 hours off into increments of 8 hours, and then later on in the day, 2 hours, and then they go back at 8 and 2, and they can split it up, and it extends the day. They can have an extended day by doing the split. Back in the old days, the sleeper berth used to be 5 and 5, and team drivers could, at a 5 and 5 split, team drivers could drive all the way across the country and never stop the truck from moving, from the wheels turning, unless they had to stop for fuel or to eat. because they could go 5 on, 5 off, 5 on, 5 off. But of course, they thought that was unsafe, so they went to this 8 and 2. The 8 and 2 is stopped that ability to be able for team drivers to be able to just go, go, go. 7 and 3, I'm not sure if that it adds some more flexibility. I'm not sure how much. I'm not sure how many long haulers really do use the split sleeper berth. Some do. I would say the majority don't, just because it is kind of a complex, or can be a complex type of hours calculation. But with the ELDs and the better quality ELDs will calculate this split sleeper berth for them when they do use it. So that is Rule 4. Doesn't, to me, it affects a small percentage of drivers out there, but it does allow more flexibility. Does it make the roads less safe? Again, that's yet to be seen. All right, so let's move to the one that surprised me, and this rule was actually submitted by the Owner Operators Independent Drivers Association, and it was not put forth by the FMCSA. The FMCSA actually, these other four that we've mentioned, they actually said, we can do this. We think this will work, and so they proposed these rules for comments. The OIDA is the one that offered this one, and because the FMCSA didn't offer it, I didn't think this one stood much of a chance to see light of day. But in surprise, it has been offered in this new proposed rulemaking. What this does is allows up to 3 hours off duty that would extend the 14-hour window. The caveats, will not extend driving time. You can still only drive 11 hours. It will not extend the 60 or 70 hours. This off duty has to be in at least an hour increment, but up to a maximum of 3. And it must be taken off duty, and then at the end of the shift must be followed by 10 consecutive hours of duty off at the end of the shift. So what does this mean to the drivers? So lots of complaints by drivers that, I get to the receiver, and gosh, they're not going to unload me for 3 hours or 2 hours or 5 hours. I have to sit there doing nothing, and I have to count that as on duty time. So it goes against my 14-hour clock. And so what this allows is a driver in that situation could go off duty for up to 3 hours, and it just simply extends that 14-hour window. Another scenario might be a driver is approaching Portland, Oregon during rush hour, and there's gridlock on the freeways. The driver could simply pull over outside of the city, go off duty for an hour, for 2 hours, for 3 hours, wait for the traffic to clear, and that 3 hours does not count against his 14-hour window, and that driver could continue on, and it helps relieve the congestion, not forced to go through all that traffic because he's racing the clock. So it gives the driver some flexibility. So, the pros allows flexibility around the circumstances that are out of the driver's control. I think there's some cons. Obviously, is it less safe? Is it going to extend? Is this 3 hours off duty really going to add fatigue to the driver and allow him to drive up to in a 17-hour window, and that's going to make that driver unsafe and cause more accidents? So that is the big question again for this rule. So again, there's a lot of unanswered things in this question, like can it be used more than once in a day? I don't think those types of things have been answered yet. I'm assuming that this can only be used once per day, And again, it has to be followed by the 10 consecutive hours off duty at the end of the shift, so that you can't just go 3 hours, 3 hours, 3 hours, 3 hours, and extend your day until you can't extend it any longer. So there's probably some guidance that's yet to come that we shall probably hear about over these next couple of months while this goes through the comment period. So those are the 5 changes. They do, again, affect both short haul, long haul. Whether it positively affects your operations or not, it depends on your operation. The FMCSA is estimating that these changes will save $274 million. I always hesitate to take any of the FMCSA numbers because I always use liars' figures, and figures lie. So I think they can make the numbers say whatever they want. Industry groups, I think, if you read the trade magazines, are mostly supportive of these changes. OIDA said it's a step in the right direction. The ATA is for it. I think there's a couple of people that are fighting it over safety concerns, and one is the International Brotherhood of Teamsters. And again, they are saying all of these rules will make it less safe. But I really think what they're saying behind the scenes, and again, this is my opinion, is that this will affect them negatively in the pocketbook, because the more flexible that their competitors can be, the less good it is for them as a union. So there's another, I think, a citizen type association out there that's concerned with truck safety. They are against it. So it's not the industry, I think, as a whole sees it as positive, but there are folks out there that have and plan to express their concerns. All right, so that takes us to when will they become effective? So, how it works is once this rule is published, and again, it came out Wednesday. I think they had an announcement Wednesday. I don't think it actually hit the register, the Federal Register. As soon as it hits the Federal Register, they're going to have a 45-day public comment period. So, and then here's the big thing. If no lawsuit, the rules could become final by January of 2020. So again, this lawsuit, in the past, things have been sued, like the ELD implementation mandate was sued, and it was postponed by 2 years because of that lawsuit. Could these rules be sued by the Teamsters, by another safety group? Yes, depending on what the court says, depending on what Congress says. If it can survive those groups, it could become a final as early as around January 1st. Then the FMCSA, once it becomes final, would need to allow the ELD vendors, because the ELDs need to change their programming to reflect these changes. Although not all the changes are affected or affect ELDs, the short haul doesn't really come into play because short haulers don't need an ELD. So some of these rules could become effective as early as 2020, depending on the lawsuit. So, but they will probably give 6 to 12 months for upgrading of ELDs before the actual finalized effective date. But as it has happened in the past, is that they've allowed, once they make it final, they virtually stop having violations on those types of fines and things. If they find it in a log that when it's going to change, they will give you the benefit of the doubt, and even though it's pre-effective date, you still accomplished what the new rule says. So there'd be kind of a phase-in period. So that's, again, best guess. I even read some comments by Mr. Martinez, the director of the FMCSA, I think said yesterday that he does not know exactly when this rule will become final, just because of the comment period, and again, if it goes to the point of one of these groups filing a lawsuit and a judge finding in their favor and making the FMCSA put a hold on it. So it's up in the air. So the thing to be paying attention to, if you do read some of the trade magazines out there, follow some of the newsletters and things, is a lawsuit? Does a lawsuit happen? And that would be the thing to watch. But I think in general, this is good news for the industry. It does, in my opinion, allow flexibility. I have not heard of concerns, serious concerns that there's safety issues. So this would be the time to type in your questions. Again, they've put out their rulemaking. They haven't done a lot of clarification, and that's what's going to happen. So whatever your questions, it might be just a guess on my part, but I'm happy to tell you what I think. For those of you in the Portland market, again, I think Luke mentioned it, the ODOT, Oregon Department of Transportation, is hosting an open house here at our offices in Clackamas this next Thursday, and they are going to have an FMCSA representative here. And so if you do have questions, you want to talk to the FMCSA directly, and you are in this market, stop by. It's free. All are welcome. So I'll put that out there. So Luke, were there any questions?
Right now, I don't see any questions. If you do have a question, write it down in the chat box. We'll try to answer it for you. We'll give you a minute or two to type up any questions. While we wait, I do want to mention, first thing, if you haven't gone to glostone.com for just all our monthly newsletter that goes out, we have a great blog that has a lot of our monthly newsletter information on there that you can go check out. Next, we usually do a monthly webinar. This is a special webinar thanks to the hours of service changes. You can go to, for our next webinar, it's John Salek is going to be talking about the hazards and rules around sleep apnea and tired drivers, sort of an update on, where's the regulations at. It was originally there in the past. It might be something that we want to pursue, the DOT, and it was put on hold. And we'll sort of chat about that, but also talk about why they originally wanted to do it and what's the hazards with it. So if you haven't joined or signed up for our next webinar, you can go to Glostone under driver development. You can click on monthly webinar, and that's where you can go check it out. We do have one question here. Any new changes for passenger carriers?
Nothing specifically for passenger carriers. They have a slightly different set of hours of service rules, and I think the number of hours that can be driven in a day, I think, is less. So these changes, as I read them, I don't think passenger carriers are in split sleeper berths. They're not involved with that. The 30-minute break rule, I would think, would apply to passenger carrier drivers. Again, that's I'm going to write that question down when the FMCSA gentleman comes here next week. I'll specifically ask him about that. So I would think if passenger carrier drivers have to follow the 30-minute break rule today, and I'm not sure that they do, then this 30-minute break rule would change for them. But I don't know that 30-minute break rule is required for passenger carriers. So today, it would not be a change if that's the case. The other changes, again, if the extending the 3 hours, if that seems like that would be something that a passenger carrier driver could take advantage of. But again, before I say yes or no, it's definitely something that I would want to get verified by the FMCSA. So I think that's a great question. I'll follow up with the FMCSA, and I'll get an answer from them. And then maybe Luke, you can get back to the group or to Amy and let her know.
Yep, we'll definitely shoot an email out next week. if there's no other questions, I do want to mention again, our sponsor today was Permit Book. Permit Book's a driver app and fleet management tool. Fleet managers on the back end load the documents, assigning them to the truck drivers and trailers that you put into the system, and it's just an electronic permit book right there on the driver's phone, accessible anywhere, whether they're away from the truck or not. We already got a great a comment from a driver who was like, "Hey, I got in an accident. It was towed away, and had to take an Uber to like my hotel room. I was chatting with insurance or whomever, and realized he needed his permit book to answer a lot of those questions, and realized, oh yeah, I do have it on my phone. I don't have to take an Uber back trying to figure out where my truck is and get that information. So very useful tool. If you want more information on it, go to permitbook.com. You can check it out. The app stores, you wouldn't be able to, you can log in, you can download it, but you can't log in unless a back-end manager system has been set up. So you can just go to permitbook.com, check out the videos we have here, and fill out the form. Hey, I want to learn more to get started, and our team can follow up with you. With that, thank you for all attending the webinar today. Again, check your email box at the latest on Monday for the details from the webinar, the presentation, and the recording of this webinar. Again, thank you, Dave, and thank you all, and that concludes our webinar.